So Biden and Kamala Harris might be bringing California's gun laws to every single state in the US. Let's talk about this. But real quick before we jump into this video, if you think that Joe Biden needs to keep his hands off of our firearms, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. I also want to thank a couple of our sponsors, the first being Customs and the other being Got Your Six. Both of these companies do a lot of things to support this channel and what we do here, and without them, a lot of this would not be possible. So I cannot thank them enough for supporting this channel. And if you'd be interested in taking a look at them, I'll put links to both of them down in the details section. So Joe Biden's gun control plan, this is probably one of the highest requested videos that I've been asked about, especially leading up into the election. A lot of people are asking me to cover this and break down the various aspects of his gun control plan. So essentially, when you look through this, and I'll walk you through it, but a lot of this is actually California based. A lot of this stuff appears to be borrowed from California gun laws. A lot of this stuff mirrors that, so I can give you guys an idea of in implementation what a lot of these things look like, because Joe Biden in this plan essentially adopted tons of things that California has already implemented and us here in the state of California that we already live under. So let's get into this. So when you look at the Biden-Harris gun control plan, essentially it's the Biden plan to end our gun violence epidemic. So essentially he is saying that there is a gun violence epidemic, and he equates this to like this a health epidemic pretty much. And it's, of course, coming from a two-way advocate, coming from someone who believes in our Second Amendment, a lot of this stuff is very laughable, but that is how they are trying to frame this, as some sort of gun control or some gun violence epidemic that just scourging the US, and tons and hundreds and thousands of millions of people are dying because of gun violence. So that's how this is all framed. And so the first thing in his gun control plan is essentially to hold gun manufacturers liable, and would hold them civilly liable for things that would result out of the use of their firearms. This has been something that has been proposed multiple times at various state levels as well as at federal levels. There's been various bills that have tried to implement this. And so what now Joe Biden is saying through his plan is that he would like to hold these manufacturers liable for actions of third parties who might do something criminally with their items, with their firearms. He now wants to hold those individuals, he wants to hold those manufacturers liable for those third-party actions, even though those manufacturers had nothing to do what that individual did. And what this aspect of his plan is to repeal what is called the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act. And this is what insulates manufacturers from civil liability of actions of third parties and things like that. Joe Biden, through this plan, actually wants to repeal that. So as you can see right off the get-go, Joe Biden is being very aggressive in the type of gun control he wants to implement, going so far as to trying to hold manufacturers liable for third-party actions. And it only gets worse and more egregious as we go on. The very next thing is he states that he wants to get weapons of war off of our streets. And so he is equating things like assault weapons as weapons of war, large capacity magazines as weapons of war, and therefore targeting them and trying to get them off the streets, allegedly to try to stop the gun violence epidemic that is going on in the US. And so the first thing in this is that he wants to stop the sale of what he deems assault weapons and also what he deems large capacity magazines. Now, the reason why from the outset I said that his plan borrows, and it appears to be borrowing a lot of things that we see in the state of California, because this is something we already have and live under in the state of California. The state of California has already targeted what they have defined as assault weapons as well as large capacity magazines. In the state of California, there is various categories of what the state has deemed to be assault weapons, and therefore individuals are prohibited from being in possession of them. And if they are in possession of them, then essentially they are criminally liable for various things. The same goes for large capacity magazines. California has defined large capacity magazines as any magazine more than 10 rounds. And so again, in the state of California, there are various laws and regulations that restrict your possession, buying, selling, importing, etc. of these magazines. And beyond just actually limiting the sale of future assault weapons or large capacity magazines, in Biden's plan, he also wants to handle those already existing assault weapons or large capacity magazines, and essentially regulate them as NFA items and subjecting them to $200 tax stamps. So that is how he is trying to address those types of rifles or those types of magazines that are already on the streets. And then beyond that, he actually wants to implement a buyback as well. The next level of this is that he is saying that he wants to require background checks for all firearm sales. Again, something that we've seen kind of here in the state of California, where even private party transfers have to go through an FFL. If it's a face-to-face transaction between private parties, it has to go through an FFL. In other states, that's not the case. In other states, if it's a private party transfer, you don't have to go through an FFL. You don't have to do a background check, anything like that. There's completely different laws. But in the state of California, that's not the case. You have to go through an FFL. You have to do a background check. There are some intrafamiliar transfer, like when you're transferring a firearm to a specific type of family member, that's exempt in California. But for the large part in California, all firearm sales have to go through an FFL and you're subject to a background check. And it seems like it's similar. That's what Biden wants to do for the entire US as well. And the next major thing that I saw that popped out to me and probably popped out to you guys in this is to end the online sale of firearms as well as ammunition. Now, who knows how large scale this is going to be? I mean, who knows if this is going to shut down all e-commerce sites like Primary Arms, Brownells, Optics Planets, places like that. Who knows if it's going to be that wide scale, but when you read it, it says Biden will enact legislation to prohibit all online sales of firearms, ammunition, kits, and gun parts. So that reads pretty broad, like it's going to shut down all types of sales. Now, here in the state of California, we already have something kind of similar in both aspects, and in two of these aspects that have been implemented. The first being ammunition sales. We can't simply order ammunition online and get it sent to our home. Instead, it has to go through a gun store and we have to do what is essentially a background check. There are two different forms, and there's a basic eligibility check and a standard eligibility check, and they both have fees attached to them that you actually have to pay every time you purchase ammunition. For example, the basic costs $19 and the standard costs $1. So that would be maybe something that Biden would implement as well, adding in some sort of fee attached to you purchasing ammunition as well. Also in the state of California, we've seen some legislation get introduced as well, trying to limit the sale of what California originally was trying to call precursor parts. The language that was first introduced was very broad and maybe was targeting all things like trigger groups. I mean, we're talking about anything, magazines, barrels, uppers, sights, really it was anything, any type of firearm precursor is what they were calling it. It was later amended to only actually address 80% lowers, but California has tried to implement something like this in the past. And so what I could see is Biden trying to adopt some of that language and further regulate at a wide scale across the US all types of kits and parts, and requiring you to actually go through a gun store as well anytime you're trying to purchase those, instead of getting it sent to your home and ordering it online like a lot of us do already. The next major thing that he wants to do is incentivize state extreme risk laws, also known as red flag laws. He wants to incentivize states to implement more red flag laws, which we all know is horrible. You could be red flagged by someone who just has some sort of vendetta against you. All of a sudden, you are red flagged, your firearms are taken away from you, and you pretty much have no due process. First, you have no due process, which is a constitutional right, and then also you're going to lose your Second Amendment rights because they're going to confiscate your firearms. So, horrible idea. Of course, that's their whole goal, is to actually get firearms out of the hands of law-abiding individuals, and the red flag laws is just another way to do that. And the next thing on Joe Biden's gun control list is incentivizing states to do some sort of gun licensing. Now, again, something we've seen in the state of California through the firearm safety certificate. Essentially, here in the state of California, before you purchase a firearm, or before you can purchase a firearm, you have to have a firearm safety certificate. And it is a test that you take. It's a multiple choice and true false test. You have to pass it. Then you have to pay additional fees, and you get this card, and essentially it's the state saying, hey, you took this test. Now you can actually exercise your Second Amendment rights in the state of California and be able to go purchase firearms. It's completely ridiculous, and now it seems like Biden wants to adopt from that as well and actually incentivize all other states to actually have some sort of program as well. And what does that mean, incentivize? Well, probably he's going to give the states some sort of funding, or federal funding, or just toss them money if they will implement this. And so what will happen is you probably will see a lot of states adopt some sort of licensing and adopt a lot of these types of gun control things if Biden actually tries to implement them, because he's essentially saying, hey, if you implement these gun control things that I am saying, we're going to give you a ton of money. Then the next thing is saying that he wants to make sure firearms owners are safe. And one of the ways he wants to do that is implementing smart guns and new technology. And they mentioned the fingerprinting firearms and putting money into the newest technology. And from a California Patriots perspective and things that we've seen implemented, what I could see this leading to is some sort of federal or other states adopting what we've seen here in California being the microstamping laws. Now, if you're not familiar with the microstamping laws, it is essentially a microstamp on the spent casings, and California has actually implemented various things, microstamping being one of them, to deem certain handguns as safe. And if a handgun does not have microstamping, they cannot get onto the safe handgun roster, which essentially amounts to individuals like me and other just normal residents not being able to walk into stores and purchase specific handguns. And that was what led to the California handgun roster. That might be what ends up happening with these new technologies that Biden wants to implement. Could lead to something like a lot of states, or maybe even a federal requirement, that all handguns or other firearms have some sort of microstamping requirement. Who knows? But again, we always hear from the left them talking about, well, there's new technologies and fingerprinting and microstamping and all this stuff, not really understanding what that amounts to. The next two things on this safety side that Biden is recommending, first is holding adults accountable for children who get access to their firearms and have used them in some way to cause some sort of injury. Again, in California, we've seen this. There are penal codes that actually hold parents criminally liable for injuries to children if they get their hands on their firearms. Along these lines, which again, California has implemented, is the safe storage, where if you know a child has a firearm and is readily accessible to them, then you have to safely store it. Essentially, again, Biden is adopting and pulling from maybe California's implementations, which really isn't that infeasible when you think about this is the Biden and Harris regime. And again, Kamala Harris was the Attorney General for the state of California, was the lead individual of the DOJ, and is responsible for implementing a lot of these laws, and was really there when a lot of these laws came onto the scene in the state of California. So it's not ridiculous that you see a lot of these California parallels that are now being presented in Biden and the Harris gun control platform, essentially. And the last one I want to talk about is the Stop Ghost Guns in the US. Again, ghost guns is this buzz term that people on the left and progressives like to use a lot. Ghost guns essentially amount to 80% lowers or incomplete lowers or unserialized lowers that people can just go out, purchase online because they are not completed firearms yet under the ATF's definition. Now, targeting ghost guns or 80% lowers is nothing new. We've seen especially the ATF recently be emboldened now that Biden is saying he's the president-elect. And we've also heard out of Biden and some individuals in his circle saying that he wants to target 80% lowers. Again, in California, we have even stricter regulations on 80% lowers than any other state, where actually there is no ghost gun about it. The DOJ has a heavy hand in you actually building out an 80% lower, where you have to send them pictures, you have to get a unique serial number from them, you have to go in the CFAR system and actually apply for that. Essentially, the DOJ has a heavy hand in the manufacture of 80% lowers, and a lot of times they don't even actually let people do that. And so it's just a whole mess, but it seems like that's what Biden wants to take across the entire US as well. Again, from a perspective of someone who lives in California, we already see a lot of these things being implemented against us. A lot of us patriots here in California are already living under this regime, and these things are completely terrible. And a lot of people have made fun of California in the past and pointed at our gun laws and said, hey, you guys should just move. But now it seems like, hey, Biden is going to adopt a lot of those concepts and try to take it widespread across the US. So pretty soon, California gun laws could be coming to a state near you, pretty much. Now, one thing you guys can do, and I can recommend, because I don't want to say it's a complete lost cause right now, because if Biden does become the president, he might not still have the Senate. And right now in Georgia, that Senate race is very important. So I highly recommend, if you guys are in Georgia, you know anybody in Georgia, make sure that they are politically active. Make sure they go out and vote on that runoff. Because again, the Senate might be the only thing that's holding back these types of things being implemented across the US. And coming from a California individual, someone who is a Second Amendment advocate, someone who lives in California, you definitely don't want these things to get to your state or get to a federal level. So we need to stop this, and you guys need to make sure anybody who's in Georgia is politically active, and you guys in your states, in your area, are politically active as well. So if you guys have any questions, go ahead and comment down below, and I'll try to answer to the best of my ability. Also, if you like this video and you'd like to support the channel, one of the best ways you can do that is like, comment, subscribe. And make sure to hit that notification bell because it helps the channel analytics, helps us spread the word about the Second Amendment, also helps spread the word about things like this that are going on in the US. So as always, thanks guys for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and never forget this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.